It's the question we've been asked quite frequently over the years. What was Knight Rider's budget? In modern times, you have shows like the Game of Thrones prequel House of the Dragon with a budget of around $20 million per episode. The final season of the hit NBC sitcom Friends reportedly cost around $10 million per episode, most of that going into its 6 leads. But times are different now. Budgets like that, even if you take inflation into account, were not heard of back in the 80s. How much did the average episode of Knight Rider cost with its stunts and frequent location shooting? Well, we're going to answer that question once and for all by examining the actual budget and cost breakdown for a run-of-the-mill Knight Rider episode, meaning no big-name guest stars, no excessive stunt work, no filming outside the normal perimeter around Universal Studios. From the producer costs, to the talent, to the second unit stunts, here's the actual breakdown for the 3rd season episode, The 19th Hole. In our archives, we have the budget for a handful of episodes, but we chose the 19th Hole as a nice representation of your average Knight Rider adventure. For this analysis, we're going to break down the costs into 4 distinct categories. The first one is pre-production, things like script writing, producing, directing, talent. Number 2, shooting, building the sets, prepping the cars, makeup, hair, sound, etc. Number 3, post-production, editing, music, insert shots. And number 4, other costs, insurance, publicity, etc. At the very end, we'll tally it all up and we'll reveal to you the budget for this episode. The figures we're giving you here are in 1984 dollars. We'll adjust the final budget to account for inflation if the episode were produced in 2023. Category number 1, pre-production. First line item, story rights. Just what it sounds like. Purchasing the rights to produce the story, whether the story comes from someone on staff or an unsolicited script. For this episode, $5,000 were spent towards story rights. Writing. The rights to the story are purchased, but there are still costs incurred for writing the script, not to mention numerous revisions the script will go through before the final shooting script is done. Now, this episode happened to have been written by Knight Rider producers Gerald Sanford and Robert Foster, but they still got paid over and above their producer salaries for this writing credit. The 19th Hole's budget for writing for this episode was $41,373. Producer and staff. The pre-production category also includes those people on staff with the show, from executive producer Robert Foster to unit production manager Ron Martinez, to the producers and associate producers like Gino Grimaldi, Gerald Sanford, and Robert Ewing, names you've probably heard. Not to mention each one of their assistants. They each had an assistant. The budget for this line item, $83,176. Directors and staff. The 19th Hole was directed by George Fenady, with Lou Race as the first assistant director. While we don't know the exact breakdown of this line item by person, if we take a look at the 4th season episode, Night of a Thousand Devils, I can give you a rough idea as to how much the director alone made for directing an episode of Knight Rider. Series producer Gino Grimaldi directed Night of a Thousand Devils, and his work in that episode, in that capacity as director, he was paid $7,276 for 17 days of work, which included pre-production, preparation, and the actual shoot. The director's budget for the 19th Hole, $18,622. Talent. Out of all the line items in the budget for this episode, talent is by far the largest piece of the pie. The salaries of David Hasselhoff, Edward Mulhare, Patricia McPherson, William Daniels all fall into this bucket, not to mention all the guest stars and the paid extras. Now, we don't have a breakdown per actor, but if you'll allow me to pivot to the earlier Season 3 episode, Lost Night, I can give you a general idea as to how much a guest star would make for their week of work on the show. On average, a guest star who is needed for the entire week of shooting was paid around $2,500. Lenore Kasdorf, Anthony James, and Carl Johnson, who played Lauri Wainwright, Pell, and Corso, respectively, in Lost Night, were all paid this amount for their week on the show. Now, Jason Bateman, who played Doug Wainwright in that episode, was, I guess you could say, an exception, and was considered a special guest star, as he had already been a series regular on such hit shows as Little House on the Prairie and Silver Spoons. You guys have probably seen both those shows. For his work in Lost Night, he was paid a whopping $10,000 for the week. Certainly not the norm for your average guest star. So, with that in mind, let's go back to the 19th hole. The talent budget, all the series regulars, all the guest stars, the talent budget for this episode was $130,123. Next up, fringe benefits. At its most basic level, fringe benefits are a form of pay, often from employers to employees, and are considered compensation for services beyond the employee's normal rate of pay. Things like bonuses, use of a studio vehicle, vacation and club membership are just a few examples. For the 19th hole, those benefits added up to $39,879. So, all in, Category 1, the pre-production budget for the 19th hole episode of Knight Rider from Season 3 added up to $319,173. $319,173. But we're not even close to being finished yet. Category 2, shooting. Production staff is the first line item. So for any Hollywood production, there's a huge amount of people involved to make it a success. This category includes, but is not limited to, the production manager, production coordinator, key and dolly grips, gaffers and best boys, etc. $17,983 was allotted for this line item for this episode. Next line item, camera. The actors can act all they want, but without a way to record it, did they really act at all? First and second camera operators, first and second assistant cameramen, not to mention the actual 35mm film needed to shoot the footage, all falls here. The total for this category, $30,759. Art department. What do you think made the best hamburger in town sign, or that Marbury Times sign? That's right, the art department. Without them, shooting would be much more difficult, if not impossible. $4,829 was all it took for this episode, which would have covered the cost of all the materials and the artists needed to create the signs and other episode-specific items. All right, our next line item, set construction. There's a separate upcoming line item for set dressing. So this entry would be only for the construction of the new sets. It's possible the interior of the Marbury Motel's lobby and conference room were sets on a stage. Certainly, the shack that Joey Rome hides out in towards the end of that episode was constructed specifically for this episode. Set construction added up to $17,468. Next line item, special effects. Probably one of my favorite line items. Special effects would encompass things like the shower of sparks seen when Kit lands from his turbo boost over Rooster's car, or when the bomb at the 19th hole blows up under Kit, to name a few. $16,585 was allotted to the special effects for the 19th hole. Next line item, set operations. To be honest, I don't know exactly what set operations entails. I assume it would be the normal activities needed to keep a given set up and running. Sounds great. Whatever it was, its budget was slightly higher than the others we've talked about in this category, coming in at $22,914. All right, after set operations, we have electrical. You can't run a production without powering the cameras, the lights for the cameras, the sets, and so on. Electrical's budget, $17,307. Set dressing. When Michael enters the Marbury Times building, the inside has to look like a newspaper business. Everything has to be in order for the standing sets of the semi on stage 1 at Universal. R. Lynn Smart was the set decorator for the show and was tasked with making sure everything was ready to go on shooting day. For this category, $23,263 were allotted. Action props. When Joey Rome is sleeping and Kit keeps activating his alarm clock, it would probably be good if the set actually had an alarm clock in it. When Michael needs to hand Devon a list of the crime bosses, it would probably be handy to have a piece of paper ready, don't you think? All these little details that you may not even think about. It was prop master George Churs and assistant prop master Steve Whiteside. It was their job to make sure that these things were in place and ready to be utilized. $14,176 for the props line item for the 19th hole. All right, next up, picture vehicles. So strike my earlier comment, this is absolutely my favorite line item in the budget. Picture cars covers all of the Knight Rider kit cars, the semi, Rooster's Camaro, both the hero and the stunt, yes, there were 2 of them, Jamie's VW thing that she flips over at the beginning of the episode, and all the ND or nondescript cars. Acquisition, rental, maintenance, painting, repairs all fall under the picture vehicles category. $17,030. Next up, special photo. Not entirely sure what this line item is. There's a separate entry for publicity and still photography. Still, whatever special photo means, it was given $5,000 for the week of shooting. All right, next up we have wardrobe. So, from Michael's black leather jacket, Devon's suit, to all the background actors and actresses, wardrobe can make or break a scene, wouldn't you say? A whopping $19,400 was spent in wardrobe, which includes not only the costumes, but the wardrobe staff to pull it all together. And then, along those same lines, we have makeup and hair. Alan Payne and Jeremy Swan were the 2 guys chiefly responsible for all the hair and makeup on the show. After all, no one wants to see Michael Knight with anything less than a perfectly manicured ball of hair on his head, right? $9,046 went to this line item for this episode. Coming up next in our shooting category, we have sound. Pat Somerset was in charge of sound for the show. His job was vital. Make sure you can hear the actors. He would often sit off camera with a cart full of sound equipment, monitoring input signals from the various microphones on the set. $9,536 were spent on sound. So next up we have location. Knight Rider was famous for all of its wonderful filming locations. Heck, they even filmed the interiors of Kit out on the road, while other shows like the Dukes of Hazzard did it all on a soundstage with a blue screen behind it. So it's not cheap to go out and film on location. You got to secure permits, shut down roads, rent facilities. For the 19th hole, that came out to $39,363. Next up, we have transportation. We already covered the picture car budget item, but transportation is also a line item on this budget. So I'd guess that this probably includes things like getting cast and crew to and from the sets, fuel for the picture vehicles and the crew vehicles, things like that. Clearly, with a budget of $69,984, it is one of the biggest single pieces of the budget for a given episode. Next up, we have film. So earlier we talked about the camera line item and included film in that entry. But clearly, film has its own line item, coming in at $39,190. That seems expensive to me, but what do I know? Almost $40,000 of film for one episode? What do you guys think? Does that sound right? Was the 35mm film they used back in the day really that pricey? Let us know down in the comments below if you have any insight there. All right, so next up we have sundry and tests line item. This almost sounds like a catch-all category for expenses, although you'll see we have a general expenses category coming up. Maybe tests were for test shots, test stunts, test set pieces or props. Just a guess. I don't know. At only $1,750, it was the next to least expensive item for the filming of this episode. So next up, we have the second unit line item. So another term for this is stunts, right? While the first unit was out filming with the main actors and guest stars, the second unit was having all the fun filming the wild stunts that we would see week after week. I'd imagine out of all the line items, the second unit budget could vary wildly from episode to episode. The stuntmen, as I understand it, were paid a base wage plus a stunt adjustment, basically a bonus for each stunt they performed based on the difficulty of said stunt. A simple fall might be $100. A car turnover might be $5,000. We don't have a stunt budget breakdown for the 19th hole, but we do have one for, again, Lost Night, where you can see, for example, the scene with Kit being blind driven when Doug Wainwright finds him. The stuntman was paid an extra $100 for that blind drive work. The overall budget for second unit for the 19th hole was $25,471. All right, and the final category in shooting, final line item, is insert shooting. Anytime you see Kit's voice modulator, or the turbo boost button, or Kit analyzing Jamie's old 35mm film, those are all insert shots. Shots done by a crew, an insert crew, outside of the first or second unit filming. Shots on Kit's monitor, close-up of hands doing something, all the insert shots. $5,500 budget for insert shooting for the 19th hole. All right, so there you go. All in, the shooting budget for the Knight Rider episode, the 19th hole, added up to $402,554. But we still have two categories left to go in this budget. Category 3, post-production. First line item under this category is editing. Once all this lovely raw footage was shot, with most shots being filmed from 3 different angles, it's time to pull all of that footage together into one complete episode. To edit the 19th hole, it costs an even $44,000. Next line item, music. What would Knight Rider be without Stu Phillips or Don Peake's amazing scores for each episode? To me, the music can make or break a scene or an entire episode. So it was vital that these composers got it right. And boy, did they get it right. $20,250 went towards the music you hear in the 19th hole. Sound post. Maybe an actor's dialogue was muffled. Perhaps some sound effects needed added into a key scene. In the post-production sound line item, that's where these last-minute audio fixes or additions happened, all at the tune of $11,750. Next up is film and stock shots. How many times did you see stock footage used in Knight Rider, whether it be footage of Kit and the semi from previous seasons, or that spliced-in footage of Superman 2 that we see in Season 1's Not a Drop to Drink? Stock footage saves the crew time and money by not having to go out and film new material when suitable older material already exists. Depending on the stock footage, this line item may also include rights usage costs as well. $37,650 was spent on stock shots in the 19th hole. All right, so next up, we have the line item of titles and inserts. How are you going to know the name of the episode or who is guest starring without the titles and inserts team? They're responsible for making sure the episode titles, guest stars, writers, directors, and really the entire crew that is supposed to receive on-screen credit actually does receive on-screen credit, either at the start of the episode or during the end credits. $19,800 for some words on the screen for this line item. Okay, so all in, Category 3 post-production budget for the Knight Rider episode, The 19th Hole, added up to $133,450. But hang on, there's one category left before we reveal the final budget for this episode. Category 4, Other Costs. This is kind of a catch-all, as you can see. So, zeroing in on the final batch of line items for this episode, we start with line item number 1, insurance. The stuntmen, the cast, the crew, even the Hoff's chest hair, all needed to be insured. Well, maybe not the chest hair. Insurance must have been a lot cheaper back in the 80s, at a relatively low $3,330 for this week of shooting. All right, so next line item is fringe benefits. If you'll remember, we had a fringe benefits line item under the pre-production category, and we have it here again. I can't tell you what the difference is between the two, but it is the single highest cost for the week of shooting, coming in at a whopping $136,788. Okay, so next up, publicist and still. You've probably seen promotional stills or photos taken on set to help promote the episode. Back during filming, these photos would be sent out to newspapers and magazines to place in their TV listings, among other uses. $1,428 was allotted to publicity and still photos. And finally, our last line item, the rather ambiguous general expenses. Obviously a catch-all for all the expenses that didn't fit in any of the above categories. $54,353 were spent in the general expenses bucket. All right, so all in, the other costs category added up to $195,899. Okay, now there's one more line item that we must take into account. There's a line item for indirect costs of $262,519. No further information is provided, but this amount does play into the final budget for the episode. All right, so if you've stuck with me this long, congratulations. You apparently were really, really interested in learning all about the Knight Rider budget. So, when we add together all of these categories, pre-production, post-production, shooting, other, the final budget for the 19th hole was $1,302,595. Adjusted for inflation, if this episode were made today, it would cost $3.8 million. A decent-sized budget for a show like this, absolutely. So, $1,312,595 was the budget. But what were the actual costs for this episode? Well, some line items, like picture vehicles, went over budget by $4,000. Maybe kit broke down one too many times. Some line items, like set operations, were under budget, in this case by $2,300. All said and done, the episode's final cost was $1,312,563, under budget by a cool $31. And just to wrap up this whole budget topic, here's a nice visual of the budget and how it was broken down. Pretty cool, huh? All right, so I really hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Knight Rider's finances. If not, maybe you got a snooze in for a few minutes. As always, we appreciate you watching. Thanks so much. If you're not already subscribed and you haven't already liked this video, please do so. Definitely helps us out, and we appreciate every single one of you. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.